All right, you guys. This is Sarada Muladhara, the root chakra goddess, going live talking about transactional relationships versus Plutonic relationships. Welcome into the chat. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, Sarada Muladhara's first time into the chat. We are getting into a very juicy conversation topic, and I can't wait. Who knows what's a Plutonic relationship? Let's chat. First of all, drop your city, drop your zodiac sign. This is how we root into the space and root into the moment. That's why I always have you guys drop your city and drop your zodiac sign when you enter into the chat so that I know you're here, so that you know you're here, so that I know who you are and where you are, so that you know who you are and where you are. That's why I'm the root chakra goddess. And you gotta know we're healing the root chakra here. That's our place on earth and us taking up space and being able to be here. And this is the root of everything that I've been doing. So it feels so exciting just to see that it come full circle and ground deeply. I don't feel like I'm a multiple personality bitch anymore. I feel like I'm one person. I feel grounded in me. I'm not out here running these streets pretending to be different people. But my different sides of my personality might shine through like a diamond. You know, we're all multifaceted and beautiful. And that's the main difference between transactional relationships and Plutonic relationships, is that Plutonic relationships accept you so fully and deeply for simply who you are. It's almost like you knew that person from another lifetime, or you have already been together even though you've never met. You might have memories of experiences with that person, or have like out of body experiences, astral traveling with that person, versus the transactional relationships that this simulated nature of reality is based on, that has to do with hypergamy and money ruling. Because with the Plutonic relationship, it's not like it's just about a different way of using energy. So we're gonna get into it. So let's see who's here. Good evening from Jersey, Capricorn. Capricorn in Los Angeles. Hey, Capricorns. If the moon is in Capricorn right now, my moon is in Capricorn. When I was born, it was a full moon in Sagittarius. I had just gone to Capricorn. So we're holding space for these emotions. Capricorn energy is about building towards something. And the way that we value relationships and value ourselves and others is changing. So we have to really look at that. We're going to get into it. It takes time. We take our time and let these conversations unfold. And that way we can go really deep and dig into really deep topics. And I just want you guys to know that I'm offering consultations. So if you want to chat more, the consultation is basically just like this, except I'm listening to you, and it's one-on-one. It's personal. It's your personal time to get one-on-one FaceTime with me, and you can talk about whatever you want to talk about, and I slightly do Reiki, and I might slightly pull some cards, but it's not necessarily a Reiki session. It's not necessarily a reading. It's more of just a chat session where we can come up with some strategic solutions for whatever the issues are that you're dealing with. And I specialize in root chakra issues: love, sex, death, birth, rebirth, the occult, and all of that. Okay, we have an Aquarius in Santa Ana, California. Hey. I like that wink. LA Aries. Hey, LA. We got some LA baddies in the house. Hey, y'all. Hey, welcome. Thanks for being here, everybody. Hello, beauty from Indonesia. You look so graceful. Mashallah, thank you. That is so sweet. Y'all be saying the sweetest compliments to me. I really appreciate y'all. Because, one of the things that I also specialize in is people that are struggling to become more visible. Root chakra healing is definitely needed for visibility, because that's reflective of our place in our family, and a lot of us as children, especially coming from certain backgrounds, like they don't want you to be seen or heard. They're supposed to just shut the hell up. And, for Gemini babies like me, that is so traumatic. Like, we need a chance to talk. So one of the good things about chatting with me is that it helps open up the throat chakra and the higher heart chakra to get whatever you need to get out there into the world to connect with others that's important to you, because you're here for a reason. That reason is to be you and take up space. But we end up shrinking ourselves so much through survival and just for other people's comfort zones, when to the point of getting into a love relationship, so many of us actually get into a replica of these dynamics that didn't feed us and nurture us as children, and they can't feed us and nurture us as adults. But we still have, like, we're still us. We still have those like visceral responses to certain energies that feels really good. And a lot of relationship coaches and people will tell you that, like, if you get excited about a partner, or you just can't stop thinking about them, you get obsessed with them or whatever, that's bad and that's toxic. But I'm gonna tell you, like, that, oh my God. I mean, some of us need some excitement in our lives, goddamn. And you do have to go through a healing process to let yourself be at peace. Because it doesn't matter how excited you get about somebody, like, at a certain point, your soul will need to settle into peace with them. And so, what we have to do, for those of us who are conditioned to like toxic, narcissistic, abusive dynamics, which is what all of society is generally based on, and these are transactional relationships, because people get together for the reason of like survival of the fittest, essentially. And that's been generation on generation. So, for most of us, like, femme socialized people who are socialized as women, I know I look like a woman, but I'm an amorphous being. You can't categorize me, you can't clock me. Like, I'm just me. Yes, and the genderless alien has joined the chat. That's what I was trying to say. I'm just a genderless alien. Like, you can't clock me, bitch. I'm out here. So so we are, like, we're here to transform these dynamics for our bloodlines. So, how many generations back of your grandmothers has been marrying for money and choosing the man that had the most money? And then they wonder why, there's a mass movement of hoes and sex workers, people becoming sex workers, to the point in this pandemic, especially, it's become a cool thing to do. And it's just so cool, honestly, though, because I love the fact that me and so many others have been part of like pushing that paradigm and just doing that work to like embrace our own divine feminine and our own sexuality, to the point that it became something that other people wanted to do too, even though it just felt so dangerous and threatening. And people loved like the salacious details of sex worker stories, which is one reason why, like, I won't be telling much of mine anytime soon. But it's a way of milking emotion and milking emotional energy and milking trauma. And it's also a way of glorifying these entities that seek to control us and abuse us, because they love it when you talk to them and about them and pay attention to them. And this is one of the main obstacles most people have for Plutonic relationships, is because you're already in a relationship with a like soul sucking entity. So to get into a relationship that will feed your soul, that entity is not going to let you do that. Are you serious? That entity is not going to let you do that. You have to fight the entity and get the entity to leave you. You have to remove it from you and you from it. So you have to also remove your dependency on it. And this is one of the reasons why so many sex workers struggle with relationships and authentic relationships so much. And, I know that a lot of people, like, it's like, one of the reasons why I had to break away from the hoesarehealers identity and stuff, which was like, it kind of like grew way bigger than I was really prepared for. And there's a lot of stuff that I have to say about sex work that's not positive. And I felt very restricted, like, within that space of like what I could say and what I could talk about that has to do with sex work. And that's another reason why like it felt right to make this move and make this change, is also because like this is a much larger issue than just the sex work community. Although like the sex worker community and sex worker rights movement has been at the forefront of fighting for these changes, but we're going into divine feminine energy, and we can't fight the same way we've been fighting with the masculine energy. Like, so now it's time for us to use our masculine energy to protect ourselves and heal ourselves and take us into sanctuary, where we can be provided for in a way that feeds our soul, not having to trick off with nasty dudes that make our pussy turn inside out and dry up and shrivel up. Like, we have to like have sex that we want to have, so this is why so many sex workers are massively leaving the industry right now. And just like we saw an influx of people going into the industry and like wanting to check it out at the pandemic because they needed money, now we're seeing an influx of people leaving because people are getting into Plutonic relationships. A lot of people are getting into Plutonic relationships. So I'm so happy for you guys. And then there's also just, you know, there's so many reasons that people are leaving, because not only that, but it's like everything in life is aligning. And a Plutonic relationship is your birthright. So that's why the twin flame movement has been so popular. And if you guys want to get some healing, like if you're struggling with like twin flame mind control and you want some healing from that, check out my YouTube video, The Truth About Twin Flame Mind Control, and then check out my Patreon too, because I just relaunched my Patreon. And it's got all the same content as before, but I'm also going to be adding more to it, like the monthly group healings that I used to do. So the Calliope inner muse healing is on there. I'm not going to talk too much about that stuff. You guys can just go look at it for yourself, because anyways, but that healing is really strong and really powerful, and it's necessary. Like, oh gosh, I'm so excited. All right, let me slow down because it's just too much going on. Because first of all, I'm trying to kick this guy off. Here we go. Yeah, because he is trying to annoy me. Okay. No, because I had to talk about what she's talking about. They condition us to traffic ourselves. Oh my God. Thank you. The temples of Isis need to return. This is why I made the healing mind control ritual. It's for healing from Stockholm syndrome. And this move, like I needed to make this move. Root chakra goddess, it's taking us to the roots. The temples of Isis need to return. I love that you said that. It's different. Like the sanctity of sex work is a lot of what people have been fighting for, and I think that that's what a lot of us that have been in the movement and, you know, doing our activism and speaking out for it, one thing that really hurt me was that I did feel like, I don't know, I just felt like I put my trauma on display for nothing, you know. And then when it came down to it, like I just felt further away from my goals than ever after fighting so hard for them. And what's the realization is that, like, it's because I didn't have to fight. Like, I didn't have to defend. What the truth needs no defense. I am sacred. I am sovereign. I am divine. I am holy. Like, it goes without saying, you know, but it needed to be said. Where can I find the links to this? It's all in the it's my new website is rootchakragoddess.love. And it's the link in the bio. Yes. So check out my Patreon. I'm going to post the twin flame reset on there too. Sacred union sex for not scenarios that dried up my womb and yoni. Exactly. One of the things that happened that was so cool, you guys, after I did my rebrand, my pussy was so wet. Like, it was so funny because my pussy is always wet. My pussy's always wet, but it was like so wet. Like, so I was like, yes, I know I'm on the right track. You know, I've just been healing some things within myself about rejection of like what I truly want and who I truly want. And that's a rejection of who I am, you know, and who I truly want to be. Because that's the thing about these divine partnerships is like, there's a lot of exploitation of our desire for them. And that's why I want y'all to be really careful when it comes to watching twin flame readings and stuff, because it's like sometimes you need that confirmation to know, like, I'm not crazy. But there's also exploitation. It's very real. And there's people that don't have integrity when they do readings. Like, they don't care about getting people addicted to their readings, but it's not the same as like tuning into somebody and working with a trusted advisor. um so you just really have to, like, I don't know, I encourage you to trust yourself. Like, I'm not trying to talk about anybody or throw shade, like, because everybody's valid, but you have to be very discerning. Okay, guys, I just want you to be discerning. That's why I always tell you, like, don't believe anything anybody ever says. Don't even believe me. Just if it feels true to you, then okay. I could be on some bullshit. You never know. I might be a trickster sometimes. Don't come around me if you don't want to get mind fucked. Okay. Rootchakragoddess.love. Wow, thank you so much. I was meant to be here and hear this. Law of attraction, love you. Thank you for sharing. You are truly beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, you guys definitely check that stuff out. I love being here with y'all. Yes, I'm struggling with my relationship right now. Yeah, and I felt so terrified about rejection. I just totally self-sabotaged. Oh my gosh. I just totally went through such stuff with this man I want so bad. Oh my God, you guys don't even understand. This is my life. Please tell me. Like, we are so used to everybody wanting us and like chasing us that when it comes to actually really having feelings for somebody, because so many women, we just like, this is how I was. I would just get with whoever tried the hardest to be with me, but I wasn't choosing them necessarily. I just was choosing from who was choosing me. But when we have these platonic relationships, it's like we choose each other, but then we have challenges. But the challenge isn't with the other person. It's like nothing wrong with them. They're perfect. They're literally perfect. They're so perfect. It's just like you can't even you can't even deal with it like that. And that's the problem. Is like, this is like something I want so much. I never thought I could want anything this much. But there's the issue where you um have to love yourself, because if you have any small masochistic tendency, that could turn into you using that other person to abuse yourself with, especially if they have a soft spot for you, a really soft spot for you, especially if your masculine energy is overdeveloped. And I don't know, maybe you come from generations of women whose masculine energy is overdeveloped and you're used to having to hold shit down for yourself and fight men off and do whatever you need to do. It will be like all that stuff is going to come up. It makes me feel so broken how much fear comes up. He is too perfect. I love that. It makes me feel so broken how much fear comes up. It's okay. It's okay to be broken. We build ourselves back up with those pieces. It's like mosaic, and it's beautiful. And nobody knows what's under your beauty. See, when you say, I don't look like what I've been through, nobody needs to know. It's nobody's business. And, we don't need to traffic in our own suffering. Like, that's not a commodity. That's not a good commodity. We're just trying to make it in this system, and it just constantly provides opportunities for us to fucking punk ourselves. Like, it's crazy. It's crazy. And so you have to be on your P's and Q's at all times. Because they want us to traffic ourselves. They want us to enslave ourselves. They want us to make it easy for them. And the more we do that, then, we're suffering from Stockholm syndrome. And that's what the healing mind control ritual is for. And the healing mind control ritual is a double entendre, because it's healing from mind control that has been imposed on us, not just at a interpersonal level, but at a like global, international and cosmic level as well. But it's also using mind control to heal ourselves, because we're mind controlling ourselves into believing in ourselves and loving ourselves and knowing that we deserve good things, so that we don't sabotage them when they come around, because that's how these demons stay attached to us. And like I said, like those demons are not going to go anywhere willingly, because they are sucking your life force energy. And you know, anytime you feel bad and broken and like shit, they get full and happy. And that's what they like. But even though they do that and they're so attached, if you try to give them love, they will run away. They'll disappear, or they'll become back a part of you, because you'll realize that it was just a part of you that you were fighting yourself. It was never even a demon outside of you. And a lot of people think that they're getting spiritual attacks, and it's literally their own shadow side and their own self that's like, you know, scared of the healing health and healing changes that they're making, their own pieces of their DNA that don't want to change, that are too used to it, or generations where it felt like that whatever choice you're making, that wasn't safe, so you shouldn't do that. What y'all talking about? I thought I did. You think you love yourself till you go to really be about someone else. Big lessons. Yeah, it's always an initiation and an upgrade into higher consciousness, you know, and the more like you have to get better and better at loving yourself. Otherwise, you'll resent others. The more you give to others, the more you have to give to yourself. This is the Queen of Cups lesson, you know, because she's so loving, she's so giving, she's so nurturing, she's so beautiful, she's so wet, she's so full of love, she's sensual, you know, and she just, you know, if she gives too much, then she ends up dried up. It's because she has to do things for herself. Feel shitty, look pretty forever. That's right, femme armor. I was putting my makeup on today, and I was like, I'm just putting my mask on, you know, and that's what this is for. Like, this is our warrior outfits, is our jewelry and our makeup, you know, and our clothes. And these are choices that take a lot of intention. Like when I took my shower, I intentionally like touched my body as I was washing myself, you know. And this is what we need, because we need grounding. We have to feel ourselves, because for a lot of us, we're not now, nor have we ever been in our bodies, but we're going there. Okay. There's a lot of space that needs to be made, and that's why you have to shed off these extra personalities. That's one of the reasons why like people aren't wanting to do sex work where they have to perform in those ways of a fake person anymore. And so that's why you've seen such a massive movement of like people doing like hairy sex work or whatever, because they're like, I don't shave, I don't want to have to do it for work, you know, or people that are like, you know, not looking typically sexy, like how you would think a man would want you to look, but people that have like different colored hair or piercings or tattoos, or, you know, alternative look or whatever, like, you know, queer people, fat people, like everybody, every genre, like it's like the face of sex work has changed a lot due to the internet and due to the pandemic, um and just shifting the culture, you know, like the Saturn and Sagittarius generation did a lot of that, and like, you know, we're seeing that people are not interested in being a fake person anymore. So we're also looking at ourselves to see like, well, what enjoyment did I get from putting on those personas, and why was it appealing to me to leave who I am or not be who I am, or why was it easier, for example, like me being in the strip club and not wanting to tell people I'm Palestinian because they would make some joke about it or say something stupid, so I would just say like I'm Lebanese or something. And you know what, it took me having a situation where I proudly told some guy that I was Palestinian, and he said something stupid, and I put him in his place, and then like snatched his money and took off. Just saying that it felt really good. And then at the music in the background that was playing was the Weekend song from Black Panther, where they were like, and I was like, yes, my ancestors loved that. But now I'm being called to connect deeper with my European ancestors, which is really interesting, because I always just so vibed with my Arab ancestors and ancestry the most, because that's my experience in life. And I made a whole podcast episode about it, White Ancestral Healing on Mejnuni Confessions, my podcast. So um white ancestral healing is really important. The whole, like, this is a whole another aspect of transactional relationships versus plutonic relationships, because even when it comes to interracial relationships, people have transactional reasons for wanting to be in those relationships. Like, it's not always a transaction as in like he's giving me money so I fuck with him. Sometimes it's like how people feel, like, oh, I have a friend of color, so I can't be racist or something like that. Like, it's like you got to look at what is the person getting out of it. Or like, my abusive ex told me one time, like, do you think that so and so and so and so and all these people are your friends, but they just like you because you make the group look diverse and exotic? And I was like, but she wasn't lying though, like some people will really just invite me because I will like add the little spice or whatever. And I think that's really fucking bold, but you don't understand what's in people's unconscious minds. And that's what we make our actions from. Our actions come from our unconscious minds. And that's why the plutonic relationships don't make sense. So a lot of us reject them, especially Capricorns, earth signs, people, Aquarius, air signs, people that need things to make logical sense will reject the plutonic relationship off rip because it doesn't make sense, because it seems like this don't make logical sense. Like, he's not trying to buy me a car and buy me a crib and like, put a ring on it and spoil me. Like, so he's like, but he's got his own shit going on. But I have my own shit going on too. But like, so and then it's like they go against the instant gratification culture that we're bred into too, where it's like you think that, and even in my culture, it's like we get arranged marriages, like, our families pick from other people's families, like they get together and decide who would be a good fit, and then you meet them and see if you say yes or no. And this is how like, a lot of the people in my family got married. So this is so cool. I just pulled the bay leaf out to light it, and it's like a branch with 4 leaves on it. Let me grab my thing. Got my little like witchy thing. My little cauldron. I love it. Yes, you guys, your tools, always gotta have your tools, and that feels good. So yeah, the transaction is like, first of all, relationships should be transactional. You should be getting something out of it. It shouldn't just be like you're just around somebody just out of the goodness of your heart, even though like you don't like them or anything they stand for. Like, you should definitely, and that's another reason too why I wanted to unfollow everybody, because I'm like some of y'all don't fuck with me for real. So not y'all, because obviously like nobody would sit here, but even still though, the thing is, like, people get too pressed about evil eye and jealousy and things like that. People are always going to have those emotions. It's not that serious, but it's up to you to protect yourself from that. And the best way that you protect yourself from that is by being yourself and doing what the fuck you want to do, and not needing a cosigner, not caring what people think. Because I guarantee you, like, the only way that somebody can send you evil eye and actually hurt you is if you actually care what they think. So the main people you're at risk from receiving evil eye from is the people that you love the most, because you care what they think. And so you have to be on the same page with people. So that's another reason why we need plutonic love versus transactional love, because in transactional love, one of the easiest way you can tell if a relationship is transactional and not and it's not that deep is if, can you be honest with that person, and can they be honest with you? Like, can you disagree? Can you tell them really how you feel, or do you try to protect their feelings? Because if you try to protect their feelings, that's transactional. If it's plutonic, it's transformative, and that means you really say what you think and be what you are. But a lot of times what ends up happening, we sabotage ourselves the most when we don't want to admit how we really feel, or we're trying to protect ourselves. We're moving out of fear. We're not moving out of love. And that's when we're combative and we're fighting, and we feel like we have to protect ourselves. Even like within business, like one of the major things that I've been dealing with my work is the fear of it, and the fear of the love in it, because I know that my clients and my students are my healers also. So when there's things inside of me that I'm reluctant to heal, or it feels like it's like buried underneath like a really strong layer of like don't fucking touch me. Don't fucking touch me. Like it's buried under a really strong visceral fear, then even like that would have me like not wanting to show up to work, even though like I love this, I love what I do, but it's all about the container and the intention and the way that you have things organized. You know, that's why I'm going full on Virgo mode in my business right now, and everything is just very clear and concise and structured and boundaried. Because like I was saying, like I put this on my Facebook, and I was saying this also, is that like I'm at the point now where I have so many spiritual friends, like, and I love it, and I have so many students and clients, and then friends too, and a lot of my students and clients are my friends. And so I love that people think of me when they need help with something like a spiritual affliction, or like they're like, what the fuck, why does this keep happening, you know, how do I fix it? Like I love that people think of me and that people feel safe with me. Like that's really an honor, and it touches me. And I have had to set my boundaries strongly, because one of the ways that I always seen myself as being able to get love was to give emotional support, because I was emotional support for my parents, you know. And that was like when I was able to talk to them, and when they had space for me, like and I'm never gonna stop going in on my parents. They shouldn't have had me if they didn't want that. So because like I need to talk about these things, so I can talk about these things to you guys, even though I can't talk about these things to them. And there's the thing, like we're picking our audience, you know, and we're understanding people's capacities for what they can hold within us. And what I would setting these boundaries is I was saying like I have the capacity to hold space for these in a session, in a consultation, not in a DMs, not in a conversation, like, you know, because this is what I do professionally, in order to preserve the sanctity of what I do and enable me to do it, I have to have those boundaries and those containers, so that everybody knows how this flows. And through that generates more wealth, you know, and that lets my energy flow, because I have to be of a pure container and vessel. I have to do certain things. I have to clean my altars. I have to, like, you know, nourish myself a certain way. I have to sleep a lot. Like I have to do these things to care for me. Like it may look lazy to other people, but it's actually like part of my work, and I don't have to justify it like that anyways. It's not a justification. It's just, this is what I do. But we're still learning how to release ourselves from this bondage of like, you know, over explaining and like wanting to make sure people know where we're coming from, and that we're not, because we've just been so like reduced to that, you know. But it's not enough to have good intentions, you know. You have to also have boundaries, because those boundaries enable you to enact those good intentions. Because for example, like I mean, I've been through so much, so I had to do this work on releasing my fear of when people would approach me, or when people would like me, or just have interest in me and want to talk to me and be interested in me. Because the thing is that like everybody's always going to be interested in me. And that, like when you're yourself and you're really you're magnetic. Like, you know, you're beautiful, people love you, they love to see you and talk to you. And like when I go out in public, it's like I'm a celebrity. Like everybody's like smiling at me, happy. And so I have a certain responsibility that I feel to other people and to myself too, because like there's a Islamic saying that says a smile is charity, and that means a lot. Like, and especially when we're talking about racial healing, and we're talking about like, you know, healing the world, like it can be really healing for somebody just to see you smile at them, or just to see you smile back at them. And you can tell when somebody's not doing well if they, like, if one of your friends like becomes unhinged about people not smiling at them in the street when they smile at them, they might be not doing so good. I'm just saying, because like you have to give the smile, and if it's contingent upon you receiving a smile back, just don't give it. Like, you know, but don't be out here like, you know, don't be out here looking goofy. But the thing is that with me growing up, my tata used to cuss us the fuck out if we were caught smiling or laughing in the street, because we were not supposed to do that in public. We weren't supposed to smile. we were kids. We weren't supposed to smile in public. We weren't supposed to laugh in public. And it was actually like such a beautiful full circle moment at her funeral when the my little sisters and cousins were like running around laughing and playing, and someone was trying to shush them and tell them not to laugh and smile at because it was a funeral. And I was like, don't tell them that, let them play. And I was smiling and laughing with them. It was a beautiful full circle moment, and I feel like my Tata loved it too because we don't have to do that anymore. Like, and she will literally cuss us out and be like, "You little fucking whores, stop smiling." And this is grooming, and this is the main way that we get groomed into Stockholm syndrome and into upholding um these generational curses that bind us to conformity and to not being ourselves. It's not expressing ourselves, and thus diminishing our own creative, spiritual, sexual power is through women, through the women in our bloodline. And even now, the Me Too movement is, and the feminist movement is used against women. It's hurting women. Y'all don't normally see me or hear me talk in these gender binaries, but it's a certain essentialism that I'm returning to, which is weird because I don't identify. Like, I literally don't identify as a woman, but there's parts of me that do. Okay, because this has been an identity that's been imposed on me and my lineage for generations. All right, let's see what you're talking about. I open up to people and then regret it and feel judged, like no one can understand my depth, even friends. Would you say that's masculinity overdeveloped? I don't know about the answer to that question, but I think that if you're opening up to people and regretting it and you feel judged, I think you need to talk to yourself more and journal. And if you feel like no one can understand your depth, even friends, I think a lot of y'all, like, you want friends, but you think you want friends, but you really want to create and be in public with your creations, and you're too scared to do it. So you're going to project on other people as if they're the ones holding you back, or as if they can't understand you. But if you actually published your shit, you would see that everybody feels it, because the most universal things in life are the most personal. So when you say something that's really from your heart and personal, the most people are going to feel it. And, you know, a lot of people are expecting to have friends and family, but sorry, like, that's not promised to you. I sound really harsh right now, I feel, but I'm sorry, but like, it's not promised to you. That shit is not promised to you. You need to be taking these worries to God and your spirit and your ancestors and yourself. A lot of times friends don't really want to see you do good, because it's not because they don't love you, it's because they feel insecure about themselves. So what are you going to do about it? Are you going to cry about it or boss up? Just saying. And this is not personal to you at all. This is to everybody. This is to everybody, and to me too. It's not bad to have masculine energy. I think if you're opening up to somebody and then regretting it, you don't trust yourself. Because why would you open up to them if you couldn't? You know, you got to trust yourself. And that's the first thing. That's why I want you guys to take my Reiki class, because that's how effort in developing self-trust. That's how you can develop self-trust. It's an easy way. I see a lot of stuff out here that's like, you know, people talking about these gurus want you to pay for this and that and blah blah blah. Yeah, I worked really hard on it. Do you know how hard I worked on it? Do you know what all the stuff I went through to learn that stuff, and the studies that I paid for, and the time and effort that I spent studying and practicing? So yes, because it will work, and you have to pay for it to show that you actually want the change. Because people can sit up here and say all day, I want to work with you. I want to take your class. Okay, we all want a lot of things. What are you going to do, though? What are you going to do? And it's all about making those choices, and that's how you develop your self-trust. You look extra incredible today. Thank you. I was laughing because I was like, if I was out in the French Quarter doing readings today, I would take everybody's money, because I look like a certified fortune teller. Like, I have to show you guys my outfit. I look like so cute. I love this. I love you guys. I have to show you my outfit. This is a costume for most people. This is everyday life for me. You get to do whatever you want. This is what I'm saying. And there's nothing wrong with it. I have my flowers at certain points. Today, these will be my offering. I will be making my offering. So everybody cleanse you. Cleanse you and pray for you. I love you. You just gotta trust yourself. You came here for a reason. Don't die, please. Don't die, please. I love you. Just cry. Don't die. Just cry. Don't die. Just cry and go to sleep. And then wake up. Do it all over again. Do whatever you want to do. You guys, like, I told you guys, like, I'm not gonna, like, pimp my trauma anymore, but if you guys only knew, like, the shit that I had gone through, and I'm celebrating life. Because sometimes when we keep focusing on our problems and we need to talk to them, to have people validate them, we make more of them. Validate yourself. Nobody needs to care. Trust me, like, I can sit in my room talking to myself. Nobody needs to care. You know, sometimes like needing people to care draws more evil eye to you, and then you have to do more protection work, and it's just so pointless. Like, just stay high vibe. You deserve it. You deserve it. I'm saying you deserve it. Don't let these demons punk you. And you deserve a high vibrational Plutonic relationship with cosmic sex, with orgasms that make your whole body shudder. And how much pleasure can you truly hold? Because a lot of y'all are asking for a lot of things you haven't made the space for. You got to make more space. You got to make more space, baby. You got to clear it out. And you got to get help and ask for help. Stop trying to do everything by yourself and thinking that that's normal. And because you can't trust people. And then people will think that because they can't trust people, that means that those other people are not trustworthy. No, you can't trust people. So no matter what they do, you don't trust them anyways. People think that other people can't reciprocate or can't. Okay, then that's a perfect example. You think that they can't understand how deep you are. Did you give them the chance? You just decided that they couldn't, and you poured into something into them, and then you just decided that they couldn't understand it. But did you understand it? Did you sit with yourself? This is a divine feminine awakening. We're going from the transactional relationships, which is actually slavery, sex slavery for a lot of people. A lot of people are suffering from the sex slavery archetype. That's why literally everything, go to my website, anything that you choose will help you with all of this. Okay, literally anything. And there's options on all types of incomes from $1 on Patreon. Okay? So I don't want to hear anybody say that it's not accessible or it costs too much. You just have to do it. But if you want to make excuses, you will. And like I said, like these demons don't want to go nowhere. They are comfortable right where they're at. So if you trust yourself enough to know that the investment that you make in other people will reward you, then it will. That's why I had made a video a while ago that was like, what does it mean when somebody has a spiritual teacher and then all of a sudden they decide that that spiritual teacher is like bad for them, like that person is like a bad person or they're doing something bad or whatever. But it's like, you chose that person to work with. Now you think that they're bad, but why? That means you don't trust yourself. I'm not saying that that could never happen, but you got to trust yourself first. I'm not saying that somebody that could never happen. I'm not saying somebody couldn't turn bad, but it's like if you choose a spiritual teacher, it's because that teacher has something to teach you. And a lot of times people just don't want to learn the lesson. They're stubborn, really stubborn. Wow, I am March 24th, Queen of Wands, Phil Hellicine. Thank you. Literally getting in the bath. Nice. How do we deal with ourselves being our own demons? It starts with realizing it, but then it feels like a wall. How do I get past being my own condition block? I don't want to stand in my own way. And yet, what's the rest of that? Okay. Um, don't stand in your own way. Get out of your own way. Don't curse yourself with your words. If you want to know how to deal with being your own demons, take my Reiki course. Do the healing mind control and take my Reiki course. I recommend you guys doing those together. And I'm thinking about running a special on bundling the Reiki course and the healing mind control ritual together. So if you guys are on a budget, look out for that. But if you aren't, then get it now. Love that. 555 change. How so? Please elaborate. Nah, I'm not sure what you were asking about. To elaborate on, so let me know. I feel like you're channeling Frida Kahlo at the moment. Love the skeletons. Oh, that is so cool because I was actually using her deck in my client session yesterday, my consultation with the client to get some information about a relationship situation because I was like, I think Frida will know what to do. And she did. It was really helpful and it's great, you know. So yes, I love it. Skeletons. Is it selenite too? These are skeletons. They're not selenite. They're from Mexico. My friend brought them for me when she came to visit one time. Please elaborate on how Me Too is used against women and survivors. Because it's just like any other like people. There's it's an exploitation of our allegiances. So it's like if you're a woman, as soon as you hear another woman say that they've been assaulted or something, you're gonna automatically believe them, right? Just like if you're a person of color or a person of a certain ethnicity and someone of your ethnicity says that somebody else did something to them, to you know what I'm saying, like you're gonna believe, like if they said somebody was racist to them, you'll believe them easily. So but they're saying that about people and it's not even true. Like so, for example, like I've spoken on this before, but like somebody that I know personally was accused of sexual assault, and I know physically, like this person physically couldn't do what they were saying that he did. Like he physically can't do that. And I know this person well. So but it was a political move. And so these are political allegiances that are getting used. Like for example, when they announced that this like new person that's a Secretary of Defense is like this cool queer guy. Wow, everybody's all excited. He's still a secretary. Like the person is still a Secretary of Defense. I don't know. I don't remember what they actually were, but whatever position they occupy, this is what I'm talking about. Like, help me out here, you guys. I can't keep all the information of everything in my brain all at once, but all right, I'm a little rusty. That's how you know I'm not channeling. That's how you know when I'm not channeling, or when whoever I'm channeling does not have that information. But it's like they exploit, so everything about the system is bad for us, like, but they'll exploit these things to make us go along with them trying to go against other people. This is Stockholm syndrome too. Like it's just too easy for us to be convinced, and it's just too easy for us to be used based on our allegiances. For example, like so many people hate Arab people so much that they don't ask any questions about these wars and things because they already hate us, because they already think we're terrorists, because they've seen us in a movie doing that, and then the guy that worked at the gas station was mean to them, or they see people in their neighborhood and they don't like it or whatever. So it's like people don't ask questions. This is one major thing that the healing mind control ritual helps with decoding, is like it breaks down those illusions that we have about ourselves and others, and it gets us to the core, because there's a lot of conversations that I can't entertain anymore. For example, like anybody that's talking about Black History Month, like I feel like I want to be sensitive, because I'm like I don't give a fuck about these history months. Like, I don't give a fuck about. That's why when it was like Arab History Month, we're like, we're good. Let's just have our countries back, you know? And I feel like there's just so many pacifiers that are passed out and people just take them and like that's it, you know? And I'm not trying to be insensitive to anybody. I respect and love everybody. And I also want us to push further past these barriers because they're truly keeping us locked into a paradigm that doesn't serve us. Even in the trauma milking and talking about our traumas and stuff, and you think it's a good thing to educate people and expose people to these things that other people experience, but it's actually, in a sense, glorifying these entities that are harming us because it's almost like singing a song of like a storytelling, you know, about sometimes it's hard for me to say what I'm trying to say because the English language literally isn't designed to do it. And like there's so many there's so many entities that don't want me to say these things. You guys, like our sexual energy is literally colonized. Sex slavery is at the root of all of this. And slavery is not exclusive to Black people. It's really fucked up that that's how this narrative is, because literally everybody, like there's so many populations that were trafficked here to Turtle Island and to the United States. There's so many populations that were trafficked here, sex slavery, indentured servitude. So making this whole, like, indoctrinating people in school to think that history is one way and making this a identity for people, like, is very weird and exploitative. And it covers up the fact that everybody has these wounds within them, and it's exploiting the Stockholm syndrome that people have, so that people are, even other people who have their people have experienced slavery, they'd rather ignore that and keep that in their unconscious mind and point to somebody else as the slaves. Okay, Arab people, Arab people who use the word, a certain slur, I'm looking at y'all. Um, Rather than dealing with the reality of what's actually happened, they would rather take a position of control and domination against the other in that system. And that is Stockholm syndrome, because it's easier and better and seen as more desirable to side with the oppressor, even though that's your oppressor too. Do y'all see what I'm saying? Thank you. I appreciate the love and the time. I appreciate you being here. Much love to you. Holy shit, you just read the fuck out of me, and I'm not even the one who asked the question. Thank you. LOL, a little harshness is okay because it wakes you the fuck up. Like, I've done Reiki Mother initiations with my students, you guys, where I literally spent the whole time yelling at them. Like, I was yelling at them the whole time, and it was, like, very therapeutic. And I felt self-conscious because I'm like, okay, I love you, but really, you need to hear this. And I think that's important, you know, and I mean, it's not fair that, like, what was I say? Life's not fair. Life's not fair, but it's just, like, we need to be able to, like, be direct, you know, sometimes. Most of the time, all the time. Mardi Gras vibes, yes. And we're really celebrating life right now. Like, we're really celebrating life right now. About to go jump on the Patreon. Welcome. Yes, please. I was thinking about doing mind control tonight. Good. Your live just randomly popped up on my phone, and you have truly been the exact spiritual big sis energy I needed. All the love. Thank you. You're so welcome. Yes, I am your spiritual big sis. I am that I am. Because I'm the oldest sister of my family, and this is my energy. Because I really love y'all. I'm here to help. The timing feels right. Like, I want everybody to win and be happy and be nourished, you know, and don't believe the hype. Don't believe the lies about yourself or others. Because I do speak about interracial relationships and race and racism a lot. And I felt very self-conscious doing it for a long time under my old platform, because people literally, like, did not like to hear the shit that I was saying, and they got really upset. And that's why, like, I just unfollowed everybody. I don't want to see reactions to what I'm saying. Like, I just want to say it, you know. I just need to channel what's coming through. And I can't worry about how it feels or what other people think. I like that's what I'm trying to say. I can't worry about how it necessarily feels to others, because it may trigger something in them that a lot of people aren't showing up for the trigger, you know? And I think that's another reason too that I just made these different changes in energetic boundaries and containers that I made when I like pulled myself away from the sex worker community, because I felt like even me just trying to be a part of a community was a form of Stockholm syndrome, where I felt like I felt alone, I felt scared. And that's one of the things that a lot of my clients deal with and my students deal with, is like, I am this big person, I have this big message, you know, I have like so much to share and be in the world, but I'm scared, you know, or like I want to put my ideas and my viewpoints out there, but I'm scared. And I tell them, like, it's because you don't have enough support, you need more support. So for me, like building heaven on earth and creating like the community, that was a way of creating support for myself. But every time I tried to do something outside of that, as far as like being in the community with the sex worker community, or like trying to participate in different groups and stuff, like, you know, it just didn't really feel like the right place for me. And what I realized it is because like I'm not a sex worker anymore, and this was just my transitional phase of moving from one phase of my life to another. And so like you know, I'm also like learning how to be in relationship with others, and how to be in like a family environment with others, where it's like I feel nourished and supported and secure, just like I would in a loving family. Um, Even though that's not like the reaction that I feel in my family. Like I've always felt rejected. I always got criticized so much, and I just felt like I had to be a different person. I never felt really accepted. So it